Laurent, thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Making Risk Flow. Let's start with an overview of your role and your career for those people that don't know you.
Hi, Juan, and thank you for having me. So my current role is to lead Guy Carpenter, which is a reinsurance broker in one region, which is Europe, India, Middle East, Africa. And in parallel to this, to lead Guy Carpenter's capital solutions. And capital solutions is what we mean there is where reinsurance and finance converge. So it's essentially a mini investment bank, if you wish. We issue bonds, CAD bonds. We issue securities on behalf of our clients. We advise them on M&A transactions. And these two roles that I have, one addressing the needs of insurance companies in Europe, India, Middle East, Africa, and providing a strategic financial advisory to clients, go to the two steps in my career. I started as an equity analyst covering insurance companies. So my job was to advise investors looking at investing in publicly listed insurance companies, and then I became an M&A banker. So the first 10 years were in finance, applied to the insurance industry. And the second leg of my career was at SCOR, a Paris-based global reinsurer, where I had varying roles from underwriting insurance, specialty insurance, underwriting in reinsurance, and as well in group functions. And so I left SCOR in 2023 as the group CEO.
So I know you are. I've known you for a while, Laurent, and I know you're quite a humble person, which I really admire. But just based on the description of your background, it's very clear you've been very successful. But success means different things for different people. So like when you look back, how would you define success? What's your own personal take on success?
It's a term I'm not very comfortable with, because there's a big, I would say, social component to it. Success is defined by norms, is defined by an outside look. And in that respect, I guess, yes, what you say is right. There is this, I would say, image of success. And I don't want to, it's a term I quite like, I don't want to humble brag. I don't want to pretend there is no success. But I think this perception, this look at what is success can be very inhibiting, can be very limiting, it can be very restrictive, and defines very often a world that we're in where the norms of beauty, the norms of ideal, I find sometimes are quite poor and quite dry, if you see what I mean, and more driven by the outside look than by your own vision, your own view of what it is that you want for yourself, of what it is that you want for the world that you're in, and what it is that for the role that you want to play in that world. And I think, and maybe this is a feature of life and aging. Actually, today is my birthday. It's you tend to move over time by the most standard way of defining success, which is what we have been educating in, and working very hard, succeeding in your exams, going to a good university. All of that is very much of a normalized definition of success and social definition of success, and over time seeking more inner goals and what it is that you want to achieve. And so while I can see that what my career can look like some success, I've had many setbacks, I had many disappointments, some of them unexpected, some of them were actually almost, I would say, not sought after, but very knowingly pursued and leading to what could be seen as unsuccessful. But I think it all depends on your own inside norm and what it is that you want to achieve. So I don't want to make it too philosophical, but I'm very uncomfortable when we talk about success and want to avoid the simplistic images that we see on social media and more generally speaking in the media.
And as part of that kind of wisdom that you get with age, at what stage are you now in being able to separate those two groups that you just described? What do you think is expected from your kind of the social norm of success versus, at the end, how happy are you with your career, with what you've done, with what you're doing now? To what extent is philosophical versus you really feeling it?
Look, it's a bit of both. I tend to be a very reflective kind of person, and internalizing and maybe intellectualizing things a bit too much at times, and asking myself too much questions, which leads to a lot of insecurity in many circumstances. And then actually the simpler answer is to say, just get along with things, and as long as you make the right decisions for you at the right time, not trying to second guess the bigger picture. And these are kind of journeys it's the bigger picture, the retrospective bigger picture only comes afterwards, and there's no big plan. So the way I try to cut short to all of these questionings is to say, do what is right, follow your instincts to many respects, provided these instincts come after thorough thinking, thorough fact-finding, thorough investigation. I would say everything else becomes secondary. It's something that actually my dad had told me when I was preparing university, saying it was an army say in France, say, you do what you have to, do as much as you can, happens what happens, this is out of your hands, and everything else you don't care. And I think these 3 steps have been very strong North Star for me, saying, you have to fight hard as much as you can. That's in your hands. There's so much then that is not in your hands. And after that, you just kind of don't ask yourself too many questions.
And then if you look back, can you think of what are those moments that you felt there were success in your career or success personally? I mean, it would be interesting, even if you could find some examples where they would not have been defined as success by the social norms, but they were success to you. Can you think of any of those examples?
Yeah. The first one that comes to my mind is when I was working for JP Morgan in the city, and I had been in banking for about 10 years. So things that, you would say corresponds to social norm of success is positively viewed, even though that was before and after the financial crisis. But it's when the banking roles became a bit less glamorous, I guess. But after 10 years in banking at JP Morgan, I decided to move to the industry, and this is when I moved to school. And at the time, it was not an obvious career move to do. I was not looking back to go back to France in particular. My wife is British, and we loved it in London. And I joined SCOR, which was a mid-sized reinsurer, coming out of very deep trouble at the time. And that was quite a risk. The company had just come out of troubles, and I was taking a group role. I was the chief of staff to the chairman and CEO at the time. So the role was very much of interest to me, but there was a bit of a gamble, whether I would like joining the industry, whether I would like moving away from being an advisor position, which is often quite respected, into more of an operator and a principal. It's often more in the weeds, more into under the radar screen, and then taking a view on the future of a company. And so here, for sure, I had many questions, people telling me I could have a great career in banking and stay in M&A and move up the ladder. So that was one where I was pretty convinced that I was following my own heart, I would say, and gut instinct. And that's an important thing to do, is to start thinking with your mind, and then as things mature in your mind, let them come down in your body and think less from the brains and think more from the heart and the guts. And so that, in a way, was counterintuitive in terms of the success norms as such, but in the end was a very happy ride. And maybe the second sign to your question is, so I became group CEO in 2021, and so you could again qualify this as a sign of success, but it was not a very obvious choice. I mean, at the time, the company was suffering again in a meaningful manner, and taking the helm of a suffering business and organization and governance was not an obvious choice to make. And here, in a way, the weight of success, of what you have to do, what cannot be declined, decided that there's certain jobs cannot be turned down, is not an obvious decision to make in reality. And the right balance then to strike is doing what is right for the company, what is right for the business, and sticking to your own values, to your own principles. And that is, can come into conflict at times.
And you've mentioned before, you talked about setbacks and challenges, and obviously this, what you could call a successful career, is always full of, well, not so happy moments or setbacks. So I guess the question is, has it been an easy ride for you? So, or has it been a linear path? I mean, you've already gave a couple of examples, but is it just trending upwards, but it's more like an up and down type of career, do you feel?
The consistency of it stands out when you look back. It doesn't appear from the, on the day when you look forward. So it's I think, the linearity or the consistency only appears over time. And I tend to be very nervous and very skeptical about, people's ambitions. Ambitions can be very healthy, and ambitions can be as well actually the most self-limiting features in someone, because you set yourself a goal. Very often I find that those self-imposed goals are the biggest limiting factors that there are, as you reflect on yourself, the image that others have for you, as opposed to just, following your own intuition. I think it's, the setbacks I might have had. The key question there is not so much are you doing well or are you doing not well. The question is, have you done the maximum you could? Have you stuck to your key driving principles? And then there's so much that is not in your control, not in your hands. And I think that idea of success is accepting that not everything is in your control or is in your hands. And so you see, when I was asked to step down of the SCOR CEO role in January 2023, that was okay. That was okay in the sense that I had done what I thought I had to. And if there is a disagreement on this is okay. But this is only okay to the extent I felt comfortable with my own action and with my own principles. And that becomes a much more self-defined criteria as opposed to outside defined criteria, if you see what I mean.
And how easy is, so let's take that as an example, right? When you step down from the CEO role at SCOR, how easy is something like that at the time? I mean, obviously now looking backward, I mean, this happened probably almost 2 years ago, I guess. Probably things make more sense, but at the time, like, I mean, you're a very reflective person, so probably you think through all of this as things were happening, right? But
it's both a disappointment and total acceptance that if what you think should be done cannot be done, then there's only one way. When you're a CEO, when you're accountable for an organization, accountable for a business, when you have a fiduciary duty, if you feel that you cannot accomplish it, it's okay then indeed not to remain in position. So I think this is, it might appear brutal, violent, it might appear, ruthless, but I think it comes with a responsibility. And I think it's those CEO positions are huge honors, they're huge responsibilities, and they come with the adequate duties. And I think for me, this kind of alignment with the overall stakeholders of the organization, when this alignment is not there, it's this is only the nature of the role of those roles to step down. So I think it's having that understanding gives you a lot of freedom. And I think this freedom is the better answer to trying to define success. And you find over time that, what looks like a setback actually was probably a form of success or a form of being right. But this, only time will tell. And anyway, what matters most is that you act accordingly to your own principles. And this requires some form of freedom.
I think that it is really interesting when you say that, because I think there's a bit of stigma that if you're asked to step down, it's a failure. And I've always said that, like, in any leadership role, you should only be there as far as you're aligned with the vision of the company, as you should only be there as far as your skill set is the right skill set required for what that role's required at the time. And the skill set for any leadership role evolves over time. Sometimes it's more of a transformation role. Sometimes it's more of a business as usual role. So the same role at different stages of a company might require different types of people. And it's totally fine to be in roles for a while and then be asked to step down and somebody else takes over, right? And I think this is something that we, as a society, we should just get our head around, right? Which is, there's nothing wrong. Every time somebody is asked to step down, there's always this blur around it of how do we position this to the company? How do we position this in a way that it doesn't feel like we've asked you to step down? It's like, no, it should be totally fine to be open about it. Right?
I think it's, for me, what it comes to as well is a sense of entitlement and possession. And you often see, it doesn't have to be CEOs, it's generally speaking in corporate life, a sense that you own something, when in fact you're only been entrusted to pass something along, to manage something, to get a job done. I think from the moment you cling on to it, from the moment it becomes your possession, it drives the wrong behaviors. And so I think, as long as you get the job done, as long as you act in what you think is the best interest of the company, and you only hear for a certain given amount of time is, I think this tends to drive much better behaviors. I've always had admiration, and you do see that for certain CEOs who say, look, after X years, 5 years, 10 years, I need to pass a baton. I need to organize my own succession. And I think it's a bit like great sportsmen. Some of them, never know when to retire, or they cling on to something that they think they own, and in fact they don't anymore. And so I think as long as you do what you think you should do, as opposed to entertain some kind of entitlement or status in that sense, I think it is fine. And then life carries on, and as long as you perceive that as having done the right things, options come to you, ideas come to you, and life carries on.
And one of the points you made earlier was about, well, and you just made it right now too, right? It's like making sure you always live up to your values, right? You're doing the right thing. You're shaping the company in the way you think is the right way. So as you take on new CEO roles like your current one, and you think about what's the type of company you want to create, how do you think about that? Like, what do you want your legacy to be in your current role or in future roles?
So you see, this legacy idea is one that I'm dead against. I don't want my legacy to be anything. And that's where I think people get a bit mistaken. Their legacy is only as good as what the next person is going to take it to. So, what I'm more interested in over time is what is the impact of what you do and of what your company does. So when you're a risk taker as a reinsurer, when you're an advisor, an intermediary like I am today, how do you have an impact to your clients, and how do you have an impact in the broader economy, business world, and then to the next level, how do you have an impact on society? And this, I think, is what has kept me digging deeper into the insurance world, is having that sense of participating to an industry that actually brings a greater good. I know that we are not very good at putting that across, but this is something that does get me up in the morning. The second thing is, I'm also very keen to try to take a business from one place to another that is a better one. And, any business can be in a good position or in a less good position. The key question is, how do you put it on the move and make it better? And third, and last but not least, is the people, is how do you enjoy working with people? How do you enjoy having you get that freedom around yourself and not get lost into hierarchy, into formalism, into thinking that you're becoming an important person, and keeping that spontaneity of relationship with people you work with. And I think these three components, the bigger picture, the macro, what is a greater good to society? Second is, what is the better position for the business? And third, it's very simply, do you enjoy yourself? Do you enjoy interacting with people on a day-to-day basis? These have been kind of the inner drivers, if you wish, of the past 25 years for me.
And now that you mentioned the one of those three being the greater good of society, the role of insurance in society, one of the things you mentioned is that we don't do a great job at communicating that value or to the broader society. Like, what would you say is, like, where would you want to be? Where would you want the insurance industry to be in 5-10 years? I guess from different dimensions, right? One is from a role in society perception perspective, but the different one also is from a how does it internally function, the industry?
I think the insurance industry, and it's quite natural, most people want that. The insurance industry wants to be on the front of the stage, wants to be very visible, wants to be celebrated for itself and in itself. When actually I think insurance is way more of an enabler. It's a mechanism of mutualization, it's a mechanism of sharing. It's a mechanism that relies on the long term, that you trade some short-term premium in exchange of a longer-term gain. And all of that, I think, are mechanisms that actually are not directly linked to human nature. Human nature prefers the present, and human nature prefers oneself, and that's okay. So in a way, the insurance mechanisms, the insurance industry is there to provide protection and to even prevent humans against themselves in many respects. But then I think that requires of a trick, the way you need to allow insurance is for it to be in the backstage, not necessarily to be front and center, but to be enabling a service, to be enabling a solution. And so this is where I think at times we get lost a bit in our own way in insurance. What is important is to have free trade going on in the world. What is important is to have resilience going on in the world. What is important is to have human activity and life going on. And then insurance is just a mechanism of that. And so I wish that insurance, a bit like God, would be present everywhere, visible nowhere, and accept that insurance can be embedded into a service, it can be embedded into a product, and it can be the smaller parts of that value proposition. And that's okay. And that is maybe my own kind of character and so on. I'm okay to be the smaller part or to be the enabler behind the scene. And that I think is what insurance has to come to terms with, as opposed to seek its own complexities that it has grown over time.
And from I mean, you mentioned also one of the three kind of dimensions that you mentioned about like what you look for in your current role was, I think you mentioned something along the lines of developing teams, working with people you enjoy working with. And then we do have this challenge in insurance where it's not perceived as a sexy industry, right? So there's almost like a barrier to enter. I think once people join the industry, I mean, people stay because it's a brilliant industry. It's fascinating. It serves a real purpose in the world. It's full of really interesting people, but it's difficult to attract people into the industry. And I think my hypothesis is part of it is the perception of the industry, but part of it is also how backwards sometimes it functions internally. I mean, without guys, it's difficult to attract a really good younger talent from other industries when they have to work with a mainframe from the 70s, right? So do you see that as a challenge too?
I do too, on the two angles. So the first one, you're right. I mean, insurance has grown as a substitute to a provident state. So whenever state couldn't provide protection, private forms of insurance would develop: health, life, and property, of course. And this, I think, is, the businesses that have such an important link to the public good and the common good. Actually, you don't have so many of them. And insurance is a private form, if you wish, of public goods protection. And again, there can be health, there can be life, there can be properties and economic activity. So this, stimulates some people, some others not at all. For sure, it has struck a chord in me very early on. I actually wanted to work in public sector, as a good Frenchman tends to. On your second point, I think, and this is actually what as well led me to become a broker. It's very important in the sense that I find risk carriers very often don't understand distribution, don't understand intermediation, and the other way around. Intermediation, distribution often poorly understands risk-taking. These are two different businesses. What I find interesting is a bit of cascade of looking down on the other, and fundamentally misunderstanding, two ships passing in the night in a way. And I thought, for my own understanding, actually staying in the reinsurance industry, but being part of a very different part of the value chain was a huge attraction to me. I think both parts of value chain, risk-taking or intermediation, have very different challenges. Clearly, the one of intermediation is one of cost, is one of being, to your point, backwards looking and a bit antiquated, and being stuck in that historical stack build up of technology and admin and bureaucracy. The question is how do you foster technology to reduce the cost of the business? And by reducing the cost of the business, I think you increase the value of the proposition. And this part of technology is essential. I think like in many things, the finance industry, the banking industry, asset management industry have understood that way before the insurance industry. And so the insurance industry lags the broader finance by a good 5 or 10 years. It's getting there. And this is, when you say this, you can either get a very glass half empty point of view, say, well, insurance is boring. Or you can have actually a glass half full point of view, say, well, actually, there is so much to be done. The opportunity is huge there. And I'm clearly in this latter category. And this is what led me to get into intermediation, to see that, like in any intermediation business, technology means that the unit costs have to come down. and then you differentiate yourself, you bring value in other parts of the transaction, you bring value through advice, you bring value in a much more holistic way. And this, I think, has again a lot of value to the insured in the end, provided the cost structure is addressed over time.
And what do you think are the enablers for reducing that cost structure? We know that a lot of that cost structure is driven by the friction of how risk, right, flows through the value chain. And again, we've got quite a complex value chain within insurance with different types of brokers in primary insurers, reinsurance brokers, reinsurers, retros.
Yeah.
What needs to change for the industry to provide more value and to the client?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a difficult one. I see two ways of answering that. The first one is, I think the good way is to be very segmented between what the banking industry would call the bad bank and the good bank. There is a legacy and there is a new business, if you wish. Or in insurance terms, there is the in-force and there is a new business. And I think the insurance companies' ability to treat each very differently, I think is often a very interesting way, because managing an in-force, managing an aging technology stack is something that requires very different skills than actually setting up new standards, new processes, new ways of working that corresponds to today's world and that is not tainted by yesterday's. So actually, you do see certain insurance companies having a digital business, having a direct business, often on a different brand, not to upset the legacy business, the legacy brand. But I think this kind of in-force versus new business, or the good bank and the bad bank, is often a way of operating that allows a segmented approach, bringing different solutions to different kind of symptoms, if you wish. Now, a different way of looking at your question is putting aside the past, putting aside why it is that we're here today. There are many good reasons to do so, but not to say, okay, where it is that the world is going, what is the future. And here I think understanding that data, quantification, systems are just going to be all over the place. So tolerance for slack, tolerance for batches as opposed to real time is going to be zero. And you need to be very cheap, very lean on what is something that you can automatize, and where it is that you have to accept that actually automation will not answer the needs. And here I think the creativity and the amount of know-how is critical. I think in this process, the difficulty is, and that's maybe a paradox, I don't know how you see it with your clients, Juan, it's not so much the blue sky thinking. The blue sky thinking, you can have a lot of very, bright ideas, bright people. I find organizations fail in the way they embark the organization, in the way they define the pace. So many organizations have had the right idea at the wrong time, or have had the right idea but managed wrongly the pace to get there, because the pace depends on adoption, it depends on maturity of the market, depends on maturity of the customers, depends on maturity of the regulators as well. And that I find is often the right discrimination performance criteria, is to say, do you go about it at the right pace, being sufficiently innovative, creative, crazy at times, but then disciplined and accepting of constraints in the short term. And that pace, for me, is the key management factor.
Laurent, I've really enjoyed this session. I think we've done probably the first section of the podcast has been a very personal one, which is probably a slightly different type of episode that I typically do, but I've thoroughly enjoyed and kind of learning from your point of view and experience. And we've gone all the way then to the end of the podcast where we've talked about kind of change technology and the role of insurance in the world. As always, it's a pleasure catching up, talking to you, Laurent, and thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you, Juan. Thank you very much.